Tonight's class was in the making for a long time. The inyanim that we're going to discuss tonight are delicate ones. And this is a shiur that over the years, bits and pieces we put out. It's funny how even my high school classes would remember this particular class. Hashem should give us the right words and the siyata d'shmaya to be able to deliver such delicate points in the proper way. These are things we need to hear. But Borei Olam should help us to hear it in the way that we can accept. Start with a beracha. Kedarkeinu b'kodesh. L'chvod Gal, l'chvod Chatan and Kalav tonight, my nephew, Avraham Sutton, Hashem should give him siyata d'shmaya to build Bayit Ne'eman b'Yisrael. Gal should be zoichet banim talmidei chachamim. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Shakol Nihiyah B'dvaro. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living in such incredible times. And times like these call for drastic measures because we're holding at the last minutes, the last moments of this incredible galut. And you know that the darkest moments of night is that split moment of darkness right before daybreak. Right before daybreak, dark gives its best fight. The darkness puts up its best fight. And boy, are we holding in those days. A world that's upside down. A country that has no idea what's going on. How things are hanging in the interim with absolutely no rhyme or reason or understanding on the highest levels of government. And even in the streets, you can feel the tension and the disarray. It's one big mabul out there. And people mamash have no idea what's going to be tomorrow. And then our parasha comes and tells us about a transaction that goes down between Abraham Avinu and a gentleman, if we call him that, by the name of Ephron. Ladies and gentlemen, open your hearts. I want to start literally from left field. And I want to come back to the parasha with an eye-opener. The pasuk tells us, this is a pasuk in Tehillim, and smack dab in the middle of Corona, you would know this pasuk. Vayamod Pinchas, vayifalel, vateatzar hamagefa. Pinchas got up, and he davened, and he prayed. And the magefa came to an end. We should be zocheh be'ezrat Hashem. It's not Johnson & Johnson, it's not Pfizer. Those are not the places. We're putting our hopes into the ending of this corona, of this virus. We're putting our hopes into Borei Olam, the Rofeh Hinam, the one who brought it, and the only one that can take it away. Vayamod Pinchas. What did Pinchas do in the thick of the magefa? Vayifalel. And he prayed. And sure enough, vateatzar hamagefa. What a funny word. Vayifalel. What happened to the taf in the word vayifalel? I would expect the word to say vayitpalel, which means that he prayed, he davened. Vayamod Pinchas vayitpalel. But yet, we have the word vayitpalel without a taf. Vayifalel. What happened to the letter taf? Why is it missing a taf? Rabotai, there's a very famous Gemara that talks about the patience of a great rabbi by the name of Hillel. Rabbis need patience. This is Gemara on Shabbat Daf Lamed. The Gemara tells us that they went and made a wager, they made a bet. Let's see, who can get the great Hillel to lose his temper? Let's see who can get him angry. So we know the story, how they came and they started to annoy him with ridiculous things, ridiculous questions. But what was the wager? What was the bet? The bet was that whoever can get him annoyed will win Arba me'ot zuz. 400 zuz. Very interesting. What a random amount, right? 400 zuz? Yes, 400. If you can get the great patient Hillel annoyed, you win the bet. I'll pay you 400 zuz. What a random amount. Tonight we're going to find out that that amount is nothing near random, and that every single thing in Torah has magnificent, fantastic meaning, has incredible symbolism, even from what's going on behind the scenes. So, ladies and gentlemen, open your hearts. Here we are in this week's parasha. Vayishkol Abraham le'Efron et hakesef. Abraham started to count out the money. He started to count, obviously, matbea, coin by coin. Arba me'ot shekel kesef. Over lasocher. Arba me'ot shekel kesef. 400 shekel he paid for that me'ara. But not just any money, but this was universal money. This was over lasocher. Do you know that once upon a time, when we used to hear this from our Rebbes, the example that the Rebbe would say year after year after year was always like the dollar. Right, guys? Like the dollar. The American dollar was the perfect example that every Rebbe gave in second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. When they came to learn this parasha, and they talked about Ephron paying 400 shekel kesef over la socher, the Rebbe would turn to the class and say, this is money that's accepted everywhere, like the dollar. And yet I told you last week that I was on a phone with a Kabbalan in Israel, trying to work out to be Zocheh Be'ezat Hashem one day, to bring a Kehillah to Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz HaKodesh. And when I asked him, how much are the bigger houses? He says to me, 3.5 million shekel. And I made the heshbon, and I said to myself, okay, that's $1 million a house. And he says, no. I said, what do you mean no? He said, no, not $1 million. 3.5 million shekel. I said, okay, that's $1 million. He says, no. It's going to depend on who wins this election. We're going to see what's going to be with the dollar. It's on its way down, and it's tanking. I don't want dollars, he tells me. I want shekel. I said, what? I couldn't believe my ears. An Israeli that wants shekel over dollars? What? When I was a kid in yeshiva, we used to get into a taxi. The first thing the guy saw when you were American, yesh lecha dolarim. And then he would rip you off on the exchange, telling you how good he was to do you the favor to give you that money. Today, they don't want dollars. They want shekel. Because it's scary how not just the dollar, but the American dream is no longer over la socher. I hope you heard that. Wake up, Klal Yisrael, wake up. Not just the dollar, but it's no longer over la socher. Vayishkol Abraham le'Efron et hakesef. Arba me'ot shekel kesef over la socher. And he paid him, how much? He paid him 400 shekel kesef. Is that a random number? Did they just decide out of negotiation and they landed haphazardly on the number 400? Or maybe there's something to this number that keeps coming back at us. Ephron pays 400 shekel. Avraham, rather, pays 400 shekel. And that's what he pays to Ephron when buying the Me'arat HaMachpelah. By the way, the word Ephron in the Pasuk, the name, is spelled without a Vav. Something was missing in this guy. I heard a very beautiful pshat. Someone told me from Israel today. He says the Midrash writes that really Avraham Avinu was ready to pay 1,000 shekel. Ephron made a bad deal. Says the Midrash, Ephron made a bad deal. Avraham was ready to pay 1,000 shekel. And instead Ephron only asked for 400 shekel. Says the Midrash, that's why Ephron was missing a Vav. he could have gotten 600 more shekel, and he lost out on the 600 because he asked only for 400. Wow, what a pshat. But nonetheless, let's go back to the story. Avraham Avinu, after negotiating, Avraham says, I'll pay you more. Ephron says, no, this is enough. I only want 400. What do you want from that number 400? Take 1,000. No, I want 400. Beni ubencha mahi. Between me and you, what is 400? Between my name, the middle letter of my name is Resh, and between your name, the middle letter of your name, Avraham, is Resh. Resh and Resh, 200 and 200. I am fixated on the number 400. I want 400. Avraham says, okay, I would have paid you more. But if you want 400, I'll give you 400. And he pays him 400 shekel kesef, which, by the way, in those days, Chazal tells us, it was a huge amount of money. It was a magnificent amount of money. Tremendous. Wasn't cheap. Or maybe it was, knowing what you're selling. If he would have known that he was selling Me'arat HaMachpelah, if he would know that Adam and Chava were buried there, and this was going to be the future site of all the Avot HaKdoshim, you can't put a price tag on something like that. So in truth, he got ripped off, Ephron. Because if he really knew the value of the item he was selling, he wouldn't have insisted on 400 kesef. But nonetheless, he got 400 shekel kesef. Over lasocher. Amazing. Says the Balaturim, what is it about this number 400 that he wanted? Says the Etz Yosef, what is it about this number 400 that he wanted? Says the Balaturim, that's the reason why Ephron is spelled without a Vav. Because the name Ephron, Ayin, Fe, Resh, Nun, Sofi, without the Vav, is Gematria 400. I want Ephron. I want 400. What's with 400? Says the Balaturim. You know what else is Gematria 400? Not just the word Ephron without the Vav, but Ayin Ra is also Gematria 400. Ephron had an Ayin Ra. Ephron was stingy. He was money hungry. He was Ayin Ra. If he knew that Avraham was ready to spend 1,000, but he wanted 400. That already was an exuberant price for what exactly he was selling, not knowing what the real value was. But he wanted 400. Gematria Ephron. Gematria Ayin Ra. Amazing. If we take a step back and we take a good look, this number 400 keeps coming back at us in many different places in Torah. Ephron, he wants 400 kesef, me'arat ha'machpelah. Esav shows up with 400 men to attack Yaakov Avinu. Mitzrayim, we were destined, Borei Olam told Abraham Avinu, 400 shana, we're going to be in Egypt for 400 years. It's amazing. Amazing. If you take a look in Tanakh, this continues. It's not only in Torah, but in Tanakh itself. You heard about the story of David and Naval. Over there also, it's amazing how he attacked him with 400 men. What is this number 400 all about? What is this? Says Rabbeinu Bachya. He's found in Parshat Lech Lecha. He says, you know why we spent 400 years in Egypt? Because 400 is Gematria Ayin Ra. And says Rabbeinu Bachya, it turns out that when the brothers were jealous of Yosef, they gave him Ayin Ra. And they did the unthinkable. Not only were they jealous of him, but they went literally to destroy him because of the Ayin Ra that they had on him. And because of that, Ayin Ra is Gematria 400, due to the sale of Yosef and the brothers' jealousy and the bad eye, 400 years. Midah keneged midah. We were destined to go down to Egypt and serve as slaves. So there's some connection between the number 400 and Ayin Ra. By Ephron, the 400 was an Ayin Ra of being stingy, of being very kamsan. By the brothers, Arba Meot Shana in Egypt, that was a different Ayin Ra. That was the Ayin Ra of jealousy, an evil eye, a jealous eye. But by Esav, over there, the Ayin Ra, when Esav shows up with 400 men to attack Yaakov Avinu, that's a different Ayin Ra. That is an unprotected and an unwatched eye. An eye that's not careful what it looks at. What does the Pasuk say? Finally, after all the presents, Esav makes his way now to Yaakov Avinu and the family. You know what the Pasuk says? The first thing, Vayar Esav et hanashim. You know that Nashim is Gematria 400. Vayar Esav et hanashim. The first thing this Minuval looks at is the women. He's already looking at the women. That was the whole story. Yaakov Avinu grabbed Dinah, put her in a box, was scared that maybe Esav would put his eye on her. What do you mean put his eye on her? Because he was looking. He was looking at She'eno Shelo. He was looking at what he wasn't supposed to be looking at. And therefore, there's another type of Ayin Ra, and that is an Ayin Ra of Arayot. It's an Ayin Ra of an unprotected and an unwatched eye, an eye that doesn't watch what it should. It's not watching what it shouldn't look at. Watch your eyes, not to look at what you shouldn't look at. Arayot. Here are the different times in Torah that the number 400 is mentioned, each one demonstrating another type of Ayin Ra. Ephron, Ayin Ra, stingy. Esav, Ayin Ra, Arayot. Mitzrayim, Arba Meot Shana, the brothers of Yosef, Ayin Ra of jealousy, what we would call Ayin Hara, being jealous of somebody, wishing that you had maybe what they had, or having ta'anot, how come they and not me? And then you open up the books of judgment on that person, because the minute you start asking, how come then and not me, Shamayim starts asking, do they really deserve what they have over other people? These are the three types of Ayin Hara out there. And in all three scenarios, the number 400 is mentioned. Gematria, Ayin Hara. Ayin Ra, 400. So says the Balaturim. And if this is the case, I want to say something very, very powerful tonight. I want to inspire you with an incredible pshat of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai is found in his works, Od Yosef Chai. He talks about the story of Pinchas. Here is Pinchas. Pinchas is coming to stand for God's honor. A Nasi in Israel, went and fell into an act of Arayot. Pinchas is coming now, and he's going to take certain matters into his hands. Kanaim pogim bo. He's going to jump in at the moment that this Nasi fell to this Goya, and he's going to kill Zimri and Cosby to stand up for God's honor and to stop the Arayot in Israel and to bring back purity to the Jewish people. At that moment, Pinchas was fighting against the Arayot. He was fighting against the power of 400. Yetzer Hara has 400 powers in his toolbox of destruction. And those 400 powers can come out sometimes in the way of an evil eye, in the way of a stinginess, in the way of a jealousy, and in the way of an unbridled eye, an eye of Arayot. In the story of Pinchas, the power of the Arba Me'ot was the power of Arayot that was hitting the Jews at that time. Therefore, Pinchas stands up to fight against the Arayot, to fight against the power of 400, to fight against the power of the Ayin Ra of Arayot. And he kills the Arayot in the moment of incest. And at that moment, he killed the 400. He killed the letter Taf. And that's why the Pasuk says, not Vayitpalel, but Vayifalel. Because he killed the Taf. He got rid of the letter Taf, because Taf is Gematria 400. Says the Pasuk, Vayamod Pinchas. Pinchas stood up. He stood up for God's honor. He went out to bring back the purity and the morality to a Jewish people. And Pinchas cared enough to say, this cannot go on amongst God's children. This is Arayot Berabim. Did we lose our shame? Did we lose our way? I can't let this happen. Kanaim Pogimbo. I'm going to be a zealot for God's honor, to bring back the purity of the Jewish people. Vayamot Pinchas, he stood up to fight against the Arayot, and he ended up killing Zimri and Cosby, but not just Zimri and Cosby that day he killed. He ended up killing the Arayot as well. The power of the 400, of the Ayin Ra, of Arayot, which came from Esav, he killed it that day by standing for God's honor. And by doing that, he killed the letter Taf of the bad side. And therefore, says Pasuk, to show you what he accomplished at that moment, Vayamod Pinchas, Vayifalel, without a Taf. Because he killed the 400. And because he got rid of the Taf, and he got rid of the power of 400 of Arayot, Vateatzar HaMagefa. That was the moment that the Magefa, the Corona, ended. Because he crowned God king at that moment. Unreal. This is unbelievable. And if this is the case, ladies and gentlemen, open your hearts. That means that the power of the 400, which is the 400 powers of Yetzer Hara, which is manifested always in the Ayin Ra, because the Gemara tells us that every sin starts with the eye. So every Yetzer Hara starts with the eye, but a bad eye. Sometimes the bad eye is stinginess, Ephron. Sometimes the bad eye is Arayot, Esav. Sometimes the bad eye is jealousy, Ache Yosef. But at the end of the day, it's the same power of 400 that starts with the bad eye and goes out to destroy and wreak havoc. Pinchas fought that. He beat one of them. He beat the Arayot, and therefore got rid of the Taf, Vayifalel. This is exactly what the Gemara was hinting to when we started with the Gemara on Shabbat Lamed, on those two guys that made the bet and had a wager. Can we get Hillel to become angry, to lose his temper? Can we get the rabbi to sin? What was the wager? 400 zuz. Let's see if the power of 400 could even penetrate the great Gadol Hillel and get him to lose himself for a moment. It wasn't arbitrary that they came up with that money of the wager. They were tapping into the power of that Ayin Ra to see if it could actually get a great rabbi to fall. That number wasn't random. That number was the giveaway. It says it all. And if this is the case, it makes sense now. Now it makes sense. Pinchas stood up and he killed Cosby, he killed Zibri. He killed the Ayin Rav Arayot that originated from Esav. He killed the letter Taf. That's why it said Vayifalel. So you know what Hashem gives him? Biriti Shalom. Midah keneged midah. I'm going to allow you to go on to be one of the greatest prophets in Israel. Pinchas ze Eliyahu. Eliyahu Hanavi Zachor Latov. Now get ready for this. I hope you have your seatbelts on for this one. Because, says the Ben Ish Chai, that any time a name is mentioned in Shas for the first time, that demonstrates the essence of that person who's named. You know, it's a little bit similar to that cloud that we spoke about a lot of times when it comes to Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says the first time a word is mentioned in the Torah actually captures the essence of the real meaning of that word. We had a share on that not so long ago, where the first time the word Tov was mentioned was the abstract difference between the light as opposed to darkness. And therefore, anytime you see light amongst darkness, you actually captured the real meaning of Tov. That's what really good means. Finding the good within the evil, finding the good within the difficulty, finding the light within the darkness. As an example, but many such examples. Says the Gaon, the first time a word is mentioned in Torah, that's the true meaning. Says the Ben Ish Chai, the first time a word or even a name is mentioned in Shas, that's the introduction to tell you its true essence. If anybody learned Masechet Berachot, and you remember that right there, not on the first but the second page, Dav Gimel Amud Aleph, there's the story of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was walking down the road. He realized it was time to pray. He went into one of the churba, one of those ruins of Jerusalem, because he wanted to find a private place to be able to pray Amidah without being disturbed by the passerbyers. So he goes into this churba, and he starts to pray Mincha, or Shachrit, whatever the tefillah was. And the Gemara tells us that lo and behold, standing by the door of the churba was Eliyahu Hanavi, watching over Rabbi Yossi. When he finished praying, Rabbi Yossi, Eliyahu said, "Why did you come into one of these ruins? It's dangerous. You shouldn't put yourself in a place of danger." Rabbi Yossi explained, "I didn't want to pray on the road. There was too much distraction. I wanted my tefillah to be proper." And it was there that an amazing conversation evolved, where Eliyahu Hanavi asks him, "Did you hear any voice while you were praying in the churba?" And he said, "Yes, I heard the voice. It was a wailing voice, a crying voice." And Eliyahu said, "Chayecha, that's the voice of Hashem. He's crying over his children that were galu mishulchan avihem." Unbelievable. A day doesn't go by without Hashem crying over me and you. When am I going to see my kids? When are we all going to go home? When are we all going to come back together and get out from this galut? This is not what life was meant to be, not for us. When is it time to finally go home and go back to what we should be, what we were meant to be? A great people, princes and princesses, standing around Shulchan Avinu in the Bet HaMikdash with Olotu Zvachim, Korbanot, surrounded by Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Hashem cries for us every day. Are we crying for him? Did we forget Abba? I shouldn't hit this subject because I'm not going to make it through. Did we forget Abba? The world is crumbling, and everybody has reasons and brilliant explanations. It's this guy, it's that politician, it's this one, that guy's crooked, this guy's going to make it, that guy's not going to make it, this state, that overturn. Will it happen? Won't it happen? Is this guy president, that guy president? Says Borei Olam, hey, whoa, everybody, could you look up for just 1 minute? Just remember who's pulling the strings? You're so fixated on the puppet, did you forget the one who's behind it all? Abba cries every day on me, on you. I want to see my kids. I want to sit with them. I want to be close to them. I don't want to be distanced anymore from them. I don't want them to be thrown out of my home. I want them to come home. I want them to rebuild our home, rebuild our people. Hashem cries every day. And Rabbi Yossi testified to it. And Eliyahu Hanavi said, Chayecha, you heard right. That was Hashem crying. That was the Shekhinah crying. Kivyachol, Kivyachol. Crying over Klal Yisrael. Rabotai, why am I telling you this Gemara? Says the Ben Yoyada, that Gemara was the first time Eliyahu's name is mentioned in Shas. Do you know the way the Gemara mentions Eliyahu's name? Do you know the way the Gemara describes that Eliyahu was standing by the door of the Churba watching Rabbi Yossi praying his mincha? The Gemara says, you know who was standing by the door? Eliyahu Hanavi Zachur Litov. The first time in Shas, Eliyahu's name is mentioned, says the Ben Ish Chai, Ben Yoyada, is Eliyahu Hanavi Zachur Litov. Why? Because Eliyahu Hanavi Zachur Litov is gematria, numerical value of 400. He became the Antichrist. He became the antithesis. He became the force against the evil power of 400. Zeh leumat zeh. On one side you have the power of 400 of the Yetzer Hara and his 400 ugly techniques of evil, and on the other hand you have Eliyahu Navi Zachur Latov, gematria 400, and they constantly are battling the power of good against the power of evil, represented by Eliyahu Navi, represented by Esav. Why Eliyahu? Why is he the representative of the power against the evil 400? Or maybe we'll say Eliyahu represents the 400 of good, which battles constantly against the 400 of evil. Why Eliyahu? And the answer is, don't you remember who he originally was? He was Pinchas. Vayamod Pinchas. Pinchas got up to fight against the power of 400, to instill God's purity and honor amongst his people and get rid of the Arayot when he kills Cosby, when he kills Zimri. And at that minute when he killed them, he killed the power of 400 of Arayot. He killed the tough. And that's why the Pasuk says, Vayifalel, says Hashem, you killed the power of 400? Now I'm going to make you the Navi, who's going to be the general of the army of the 400 of good. And therefore your very essence, your very name, is going to be Gematria 400, because your role is constantly fighting against the power of Arbat Me'ot, of the evil 400 of Yetzer Hara. So on one hand we have the 400 of Esav, the 400 of Ephron, and the 400 of the jealousy that put us in Egypt for 400 years. But on the other hand, we have Eliyahu Navi Zachur Latov, Gematria 400. He's the anti-power, the power of good against the 400 of bad. Incredible. And that's why I have to tell you something. And I'm really hoping that you're going to cherish this, because to me, this is beyond fantastic. I've been telling this to the classrooms of my kids for years. If you take a look a little bit later on in Masechet Kiddushin, when we talk about the laws of purity, you'll see that every story that the Gemara talks about Eliyahu has a connection to the number of 400. Sometimes it's clear on the open, and sometimes it's hidden. Let's just talk about the open for the moment. Very famous Gemara of Rav Kahana. The Gemara starts a little bit before that. The Gemara tells us about Rav Papa, who was petitioned by a certain Matronita, a princess, who came and tried to get Rav Papa to sin with her. The Gemara over there, it's in the Daf Mems of Kiddushin. Mem Amud Aleph. Baruch Hashem. Mem Amud Aleph. Rav Papa jumps into the oven, and he sits there in the fires. And she gets all, what are you doing? And Rav Papa says, what you're asking me to do is going to send me to the fires anyways. I might as well sit in them now, because whatever is going to happen with you is going to send me there regardless. A miracle took place And she left him alone after seeing to the extent of what he would do to stay away from an immoral sin with her. And Reb Papa walked out unsinged. Amazing. Amazing, the miracles of Siyata Dishmaya, of those people that sacrifice to be the last moral people of this world. The Jewish people. We're the last chance for society. We're the last chance. The last chance of morality on this planet. You and I, the Jewish people. And then the Gemara tells us, Hahu Matronita, this is the story I want you to hear. There was this princess who came with her army, and she came into the shuk, and she walked up to Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana was a master basket weaver, and he would make these beautiful baskets. And she's looking at Rav Kahana's basket, and she says to Rav Kahana, how much will it cost? And Rav Kahana starts telling her. She says, no, not for the basket, for the sin. And Rav Kahana already understood. And she was standing there with her soldiers. It wasn't that she was giving him a choice. Rav Kahana tells her a brilliant technique that one must learn when looking at test, nisayon, when you're tested. Rav Kahana tells her, right now look at me, I'm in my work clothes, and I'm filled with dirt from head to toe after a whole day of working. Give me a few minutes. Let me go upstairs. I'm going to shower and clean myself because I'm not worthy to go with you now in the way I am, so dirty and filthy. And she said, oh, okay, please, go ahead. Says the Gemara, Rav Kahana went upstairs, and instead of going to shower, he went to the roof and he jumped off the roof. I'd rather leave this world pure than to even think for a moment, to even entertain for a moment such a sin of immorality, something that's so hated by my God. Hashem is soneh zima. He hates that power of Arba Me'ot, especially Arayot, especially that Ayin Ra, the eye that can't stop looking at things that it shouldn't be looking at, which leads to these acts of incest. Rav Kahana goes up to the roof and he jumps off the roof. Says the Gemara. Eliyahu Hanavi came running Arba Me'ot Mil, 400 miles, and he makes a diving catch. And he catches Rav Kahana before he hits the ground. It saves him. How many miles? Does it really matter how many miles Eliyahu came running? And between me and you, isn't Eliyahu a malach? At least in the days of Rav Kahana. And even if he came in a physical body, because Eliyahu has that ability, the hybrid between physical and between spiritual, moving in and out from malach to person. But at the end of the day, let him just show up at the spot that Rav Kahana would land. What a catch. No. The Gemara has to tell you that Eliyahu Navi came running 400 miles. Because the Gemara is telling you that he had to overcome the power of Arba Me'ot to be zocheh, to be caught by Eliyahu Navi. Because that's what Eliyahu Navi stands for. Eliyahu Navi Zachor Latov. Gematria 400. He is the anti-Arba Me'ot. He's the one that fights against Arba Me'ot. And the minute you fight against Arba Me'ot, you know who's in your corner? Eliyahu Navi. You know who's going to save you? Eliyahu Navi. You know who's going to come to your aid? Eliyahu Navi. Because he's the general for the army that fights against Arba Me'ot, Arayot, jealousy, stinginess, all these things that start with the eye. And over here, Rav Kahana, boy, did he make a display of a fight. He was ready to die. Al Yedei Kiddush Hashem, just not to do this act of incest, of Arayot. And at that moment, Eliyahu comes running and says, he's on my team. We fight together against the 400. Eliyahu Navi Zachor Latov. I ran 400 miles, meaning I overcame the power of 400 on another great Jew by the name of Rav Kahana, who was ready to crush the letter Taf. Vayifalel. And that's why he caught him. I'm going to tell you something off the charts tonight. Don't try this at home. I'm telling you straight up. Don't try this at home. But the Maharsha over there on this Gemara says, a gem, a gem, a gem. The Maharsha writes that if God forbid a Jew is ever in a situation where he's being tested by arayot, like this story of Rav Kahana, and he's being petitioned, and he has no way out, and he's trying to save himself, and he doesn't know what to do, and he tries to this way and in that way, says the Maharsha, even if he does an act that would seemingly be so dangerous that he's putting his life on the line, he has a promise from this Gemara that Eliyahu will save him 100%. So I have this American Jewish businessman who you would think is just a regular guy because he learns Daf Yomi in the morning, and because when he gets home, he's tired and he's most of the day trying to do whatever he can for Yiddishkeit in his family, but he's not so much into learning anymore. And they'll call him a balabat, they'll call him a balabayit. And then one day, this guy's petitioned by somebody's secretary in a very disgusting, unruly way. And this guy turns around and he's back with his back to the wall, and there's no way for him to run, and he's getting weak in the test. And he turns around and opens a window. Oh boy, you know where I'm going with this. The Maharsha says, don't try this at home. Don't you dare go out and say, Rabbi Duvi said, no. Rabbi Duvi didn't say nothing. The Maharsha says that if a person is ever put into those positions of a terrible test of arayot, and they want to escape from it, even if they use the escape route that would put their life on the line, they have a promise, a guarantee, that the general that fights against the power of 400 will always show up to save you. Don't try it at home. I don't want to hear any stories. I don't get any phone calls. But look at what we're dealing with. Look how powerful this concept is. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable. The Gemara in Eruvin tells us in Daf Nun Dalet Amud Bet, there was this great rabbi by the name of Reb Preda. Reb Preda used to teach one of his students 400 times every piece of Gemara until he got it. The student didn't get it until he heard it 400 times. And his rabbi was so patient that he would be willing to teach him the Pshat, the Gemara, 400 times. One time, the Gemara tells a story over there that Reb Preda was in a rush. He had to go somewhere. Milashon Pereda, right? He had to go somewhere. Reb Preda had to go somewhere. And because of that, when it came time to teach this student, he taught it to him 400 times, but a little bit quicker than he typically did because he had to go. And the student sensed that his Rebbe had a foot out the door. So because of that already, he was maybe distracted, thrown off, disheartened maybe. Says the Gemara, this student did not get it that day, even after 400 times, because he felt the Rebbe had a foot out the door. Take a look how sensitive students are. Take a look how great Rebbes once were. So the Gemara says that Reb Preda saw that he didn't get it. He didn't get it. So Reb Preda turns around and is mevatel the place he had to go to, and he sits down again with all the patience in the world. I can cry from this Gemara. What a Rebbe, where's my Rebbe? Where's my Rebbe? Where's my rabbi? Where's my Rebbe? He made me, you made me, Rebbe. You made me. I'm thinking, as I'm talking to you now, I'm seeing certain faces go past my head of the Rebbes that they somehow found the patience to still believe in me. Repreda. He sits down and he tells his student, I'm not leaving. You're more important to me than anything I have to go to. I'm canceling all appointments. Let's take this from the top again. And he teaches him the Gemara another 400 times. And this time the student gets it, because it was done with all the love and all the warmth and all the patience. And boy, can they sense it when you're patient, when you're not, when there's love and when there's not. Are you being yaitza, you're just picking up a salary, or you're there because you need to be there, because this is where Hashem planted me, and this is the place that I'm putting my footprint in Klal Yisrael, on the hearts and souls of the young boys that one day are going to be budding Talmidei Hachamim. I want to bring them back to Abba and back to Hashem's Torah. I want them to taste how sweet learning could be. And they ain't going to taste it if I don't give it over as sweet and loving as I can. And because of that, Reb Preda goes another 400 times. And this time the student gets it. Oh, does he get it? Oh, does he get it? At that moment, says the Gemara, Eruvin Nun Dalet Amud Bet, a voice, a bat kol, comes out from heaven and says, Reb Preda, you have a choice. Because of what you just did, either you're going to live for another 400 years, or you and your whole generation will go straight to Olam Haba. Wow, what a decision. Reb Preda decided to opt for box number 2. He decided that he and his entire generation would go to Olam Haba. Says the Bat Kol, because you picked that choice, meaning you didn't think just about yourself, but you thought about everybody else. So you were selfless even in your reward. So now, says Shamayim, I'm going to give you both. Box number 1 and box number 2. Reb Preda lived for another 400 years, and him and his generation went to Olam Haba, because in such a generation you're able to have a Reb Preda. You're able to have someone who did that, who didn't lose patience, who didn't lose heart, who battled the power of Arba Me'ot. And he taught it Arba Me'ot Pa'amim, twice. The power of the Arba Me'ot says, just get it over with. The power of the Arba Me'ot says, Yalla, be stingy with your time, be stingy with your love, be stingy with your knowledge. Wasn't that the students of Rabbi Akiva? They wouldn't learn with someone who wasn't on their level. That's the power of Arba Me'ot. So Reb Preda would come and teach Arba 400 times. He would teach the student to show that I'm coming the anti-power against Arba Me'ot. I do have time. I do love you. I'm not stingy. I'm ready to give you all my love, all my credit, all my knowledge. I'm not Kamsan. I'm not Ephron, Gematria 400. I'm Reb Preda. Wow. Shamayim says, you just knocked out the 400th Reb Preda. You and your generation is going to go to Olam Haba. Unreal. That's fantastic. And this is the secret. Today we're fighting against this Koach Arba Me'ot. So many different ways. So many different ways. It's unbelievable. It's coming at us with a certain cold-heartedness that people are losing their feel for other people. They're also losing that feeling of wanting to make a change in the lives of other people, where we became a little bit stingy, maybe selfish, in a selfish society. Where today, somehow or other, this new generation, a lot of times, I hire a lot of guys, so many different positions in the shul, night Seder, morning Seder, high school minyan, young kids minyan, young adults minyan. Nabol Tibol, I need people to help. I need people to help. Duvi Ben Shushan needs to learn how to delegate, to be able, because when I see these kids, I fall in love with them. I can't stop wanting to give to them, but the problem is I'm nobody, one guy. I need to get good Rebbes. So today we have a whole crew, a whole staff of Rebbes on a night Seder that homes 100 guys a night. We have a whole staff of Rebbes in the morning, learning all different array of topics. Halacha, be'ayun, bikiyut. And besides the children's programs, I'm just talking about the adults. You know how many times I was sitting in interviews with different guys, and we were talking about the different opportunities to make change in the lives of our kids, to get them to be inspired, to want to learn, to love learning, to love Hashem, to love Judaism, to love themselves, to love what they're a part of. And I see the guy looking at me and going like, yeah, no. And then I look at the guy like, well, am I boring you? And then he says, no, God forbid, Rabbi. By the way, how much you paying? That's the first question you ask me. That's the first question you ask me. How much are we paying? Meaning what? Listen, Rabbi, I don't know. Listen, I have a mortgage too. I also have to pay my mortgage. I also have expenses. I married off 2 girls. I know what it is. I know what expenses are. But once upon a time, when we had an opportunity to go out and teach, it was like what Reb Shach said. I once went to the shiur Klali in Panovich on my last year as a bacher in Israel. Me and my Havruta, we went out to Panovich one Thursday, actually. Reb Shach gave shiur Klali on Thursday. He started at 12:15. He was supposed to be over at 1:30. We got the Mar Mekomot in the morning because we called up Bnei Brak, we called up Panovich that morning from the yeshiva in Itri where we were, and we prepared all the Mar Mekomot, and we prepared the Gemara. They were learning Bab Metzia at that time. And then we got into a Sheirut. We went out to Bnei Brak. We came in right at the beginning of Rav Shach's shiur. Rav Shach was standing there in that famous pose with his 2 fists up against each other in the air as he was yelling and screaming the Gemara. The sugya of Slaim Dinrin, I remember it like yesterday. I remember the whole shiur in my head. What a shiur. Reb Shach went 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. It was already 3:30. He was supposed to finish 2 hours ago. Nobody moved. And he was still going fire. And then Shach realized the time. You had to see the look on his face. He realized it was like he was dumbfounded. How in the world is it 3:30? I'm only getting warmed up. And Reb Shach looks at the crowd and he says in Yiddish, I'll never forget, Sei mir schuldig. That means forgive me. Ich bin azoi wie a sikel. Reb Shach couldn't say the letter shin. By him, every shin was a sin. So he was saying, I'm like a shikor, I'm like a drunk. Ich steh da vor ein bottle. I'm standing in front of the bottle. I can't help myself, Reb Shach used to say. I can't help once I start talking Torah, I can't help myself. I didn't realize the time, I didn't realize nothing. He could have went on for another 3 hours. Once upon a time, we had that. We had guys that saw the children of Klal Yisrael like a shikor, and they just wanted to give. I saw guys like this in our community. Lume Shalom. That's a guy that just wants to give. Rabbi Wadish. He just wants to give. Rabbi Hillel Haber. These were people, and are people, still are people, that just wanted to have the zchut, to give to Klal Yisrael. Just let me be lucky enough to be from the givers of the sweetest Torah, to be able to bring the hearts of our kids back. Money, okay, you'll pay me whatever I need, whatever it is, we'll figure it out, but give me the opportunity. That was Repreda. That was the koach against the 400. The Arba Meot even got into our education system, where even our education has a different checks and balances today than what the yeshivot once had once upon a time. A different bar of rating system. It has to be elite, and it has to be this, and it has to be that. And suddenly, a school has PTA, and the English teachers have 30 parents online waiting to talk to the English teacher, and the Rebbe is sitting there alone with 1 or 2 parents. Our checks and balances. There's an ayin ra that got into the purity of our learning, our education of Klal Yisrael, both in the teachers and those who are being taught, excuse me. And also our bar of what we're looking for in education. There was once upon a time that mothers used to pray by their Shabbat candles with tears. Hashem, I want my son to grow up to be a Talmid Chacham. That's all I want. But then the Ayin Ra, the Arba Meot got in. And somehow or other, not everyone's yearning for that anymore. My son a rabbi? He went off to Israel? Yeah, Hazit. Yeah. I have 6 sons, Rabbi. 1 became religious. It's like 1 bit the dust. It's like, oh my God. Once upon a time, there was such a pride. Once upon a time, there was such a want. There was such a cheshek to serve, to love, to learn, to give over. We had once upon a time Rebbes like Reb Preda, who fought the Arba Meot. They had all the love and all the patience in the world for a student. I hope today we can keep that going, not allow these things to come in of honor or titles or status or diplomas that take away from the quality of the pure Torah in the way it was meant to be given with the proper hashkafa. I pray to Hashem that we're still on that path. Because those people that are still giving their heart and soul for the Jewish people selflessly, and they're not stingy with their time, and they're not stingy with their love, and they're not stingy with their teaching, and they go the extra mile at times that you would never believe, and they take on more classes, and they take on more responsibility, and they're overdoing it. Those are the people that have a little bit of the Eliyahu Navi Zachor Latov inside of them. And those are the people that are going to meet Eliyahu Navi Zachor Latov first when he announces the coming of Mashiach. We have to be so careful today. When it comes to our kids, what are they looking at? Are we allowing the Ayin Ra into our homes? Do you think that the iPhone could have been named after any letter in the alphabet? It could have been the X phone, maybe. It could have been the G phone, also maybe. It could have been the A phone, the B phone, the D phone. It could have been anything. It could have been the E phone, which would have made more sense, I think. Because e-commerce and eBay and the E always stood for something a little bit more intellectual and technological advanced. The e-phone, no. The symbol of the iPhone is the bitten apple. You need to know the force behind this incredible invention. It is the iPhone. It's the Ayin Ra. It's the power of the 400. We've got to be so careful. What are we giving to our 9-year-olds to look at? Remember, Arba Meot was the power of Arayot. Pinchas comes and kills it, And therefore, vayifalel, he got rid of the taf, which is gematria 400, not vayitpalel. The taf is gone. He killed the arayot. What are we letting our kids look at? With one wrong press of a button, they can find themselves with little video clips in the back streets of Thailand. The purity of those eyes. And the eyes are the window to the soul. And the minute the gunk comes in the eyes, it goes straight and it messes over the soul. Do you expect that the engine of the soul to work properly when you put a gasoline inside that's so dirty? That engine coughs and huffs and puffs, and it can hardly even feel anything anymore. Spirituality is out when the gunk comes in. It messes over the system inside and out. And what does it do to the mind of a child? And what is it going to do to the child later when they have to be loyal to a wife and all that gunk is in the mind, where suddenly they became infatuated with all the wrong things? How are they going to stay married? How are they going to carry values? How are they going to stay loyal? How are they going to bring up their children? It starts with the eyes. It starts with the eyes. Everything. And if our kids, if they're not being eaten alive today by this power of the 400 that hits immorality to extent where today sin has no shame. Today corruption is out in the open. Today the leaders of the world openly have no shame anymore. Open lies and corruption in front of our eyes. And even the press, the media, which is supposed to be the right of freedom of speech, is anything but free. It's only covering up scandal after scandal. We're living in the back streets of Sodom va'Amorah, the headquarters of the power of this Arba Me'ot, of Arayot, of Kamsanut, of jealousy and Zinut. Guard your kids. Guard their eyes. Guard their eyes. Save them. Save Klal Yisrael. Because the minute we can beat this, you know who we meet? Eliyahu Navi. There's a reason why Eliyahu was made the one to announce the coming of Mashiach. Because he stands for the things that once we beat them, we'll be on our way. He stands for Eliyahu Navi Zachor Latov. Numerical value 400. Beat the 400 and you'll get to meet the man himself. And he'll introduce you to Melech HaMashiach. And then we get on the planes and we go to Israel and we go back home to where we belong. You want to hear what it means? Once upon a time, Baba Sali had a son, Baba Meir, Zechet Tzadik Lebracha, who passed away young. But his eyes were holy. And one time, a woman came to Baba Meir, Aguna. Her husband ran off to France. Nobody knows where the guy was. Never gave her a get. She's stuck for life. She came begging, crying with her father and her brothers. Please, what should I do? I'm stuck for life. Baba Meir took out a piece of paper from his desk, took out a pen, and started to draw a diagram of the down streets, the alleyways in the heart of Paris. And he started to draw signs and stores. And he turns to the father of the girl and he says, follow this. And he shows how if you go down this street and down this alleyway and up this street, you'll come to a narrow side street. There's an apartment there above the stores. He is in the third apartment to the right. And he makes X marks the spot. Well, that's better than my story with the GPS looking for my daughter's iPhone. He makes X marks the spot. He says, that's where he is. That's where you'll find him. Go with the police. You'll scare him so much, he'll give you the get on the spot. They flew out the next day to Paris. father and brothers and a few friends, they took the handwritten map of Baba Meir, and they're running up and down the streets like a treasure hunt. And they make their way through the streets until finally they come to that side street, and they come up the stairs and they go to the third apartment on the right, and they literally bang the door down with the French police. And the guy was there. And he was like, he sees his father-in-law. Oh my gosh! It's like they storm, and he's like, it's like, and he was like, okay, I'll do anything you want. Don't hurt me. On the spot, Adam signed a get and give it over to the shaliach of the woman. They come back to Israel and they come to Baba Meir and they said, what? How did you? Did you ever go to France? Baba Meir never left Israel. You never left Israel? You never left Israel. How did you write in detail every street, every store, every sign? Says Baba Meir, when you're careful with your eyes, you'll be surprised how far you can see. What are we doing to our kids? What are we doing to our teens? What are we doing to ourselves? Arba me'od shekel kesef, beini u'bencha mahi, says the Yetzer Hara. What's the big deal between me and you? So you take another shuf. So you take another look. No one's looking. No one cares. You're not going to do anything. Ela lirotam bilvad. You're only looking. You're not going to touch. You're not going to... God forbid. That's the way it starts. Says the Gemara. It starts with the eye. And then it goes to the heart. And then after that, oy vey, forget it. Beinu ben Chamahi. This is not Ephron. Ephron is Gematria 400. It's the 400 talking to you. You don't have to watch your eyes. Big deal. No one knows that you looked. Go take a second look. Lo taturu ahare levavchem. Ahare enechem. Here's a nice pshat for you. You know what ahare? It doesn't mean don't go after your eyes. No. Don't look back another time. Ahare, what you saw with your eyes at first glance by mistake, are you going to go take a second look? That's the moment you fall. It's the ahare that dictates the power of the 400, if he got you or not. If you realize you're in a position that you shouldn't be looking at something, or there's something walking down the block, or there's something hanging on the wall, or there's a billboard that you're about to pass, what are you going to do? Ahare, you noticed it. Are you going to look back? Or are you going to stand tall and say, Abba, I'm about to destroy the Arba Me'ot. And at that moment, Eliyahu Navi stands at your side and gives you Hazaku Baruch, and you could even pray at that moment, because that moment is an Et Ratzon. We want to bring a Geula, but we need to bring Eliyahu first. Eliyahu Hanavi Zachor Latov, Gematria Arba Me'ot. You beat it, and he'll come. And maybe thanks to you, he came. And once he's here, he's going to announce the coming of Mashiach very soon. Thank you for listening.
If you've enjoyed this video or know someone who would, please share it. Tzikul Mitzvot.